He had one forbidden choice, and it could cost him everything. Winter, 1942. Inside a sealed British engine plant, a lone mechanic stood over a silent Merlin engine. The air was cold enough to burn his breath white. The lamp above him flickered, casting trembling shadows across the metal block. Outside the concrete walls, the distant drone of departing aircraft rolled through the night like a warning. Arthur Hale saw it again, the same hidden flaw buried deep inside the engine's heart. A thin crack, almost invisible. Silent. Growing. Deadly. Pilots never knew it existed. They only felt the sudden loss of power, and the long drop afterward. He had reported it. He had begged them to listen. The answer never changed. Follow the manual. But the numbers were rising. Too many engines failed. Too many letters were sent home. Too many sons never returned. So now, in this dim corner of the factory, he faced the choice alone. Obey the rules and let the flaw remain, or break the law and save men he would never meet. His hand hovered above the wrench. Cold metal. Shaking fingers. A heart pounding louder than the machines outside. Then he tightened one forbidden bolt. A small twist. A quiet click. A sound no one else would hear, yet it would echo across thousands of miles of sky. If anyone discovered what he had done, he wouldn't be called a hero. He would be arrested as a saboteur. He didn't know it yet, but this simple secret act, this tiny turn of steel, would save countless pilots. And this was only the beginning. Before that night in 1942, he had never broken a rule in his life. His name was Arthur Hale, a quiet man from a small town in northern England. He grew up listening to the sound of old tractor engines in his father's farmyard. While other boys chased footballs in the mud, Arthur opened metal casings with a rusted screwdriver, searching for the secret behind every hum and rattle. He loved machines because they were honest. A bolt was either tight or loose. A gear either turned or jammed. Nothing hid its intentions, not like people. When the war came, he joined the Merlin Engine Works not for glory but for one steady truth. He wanted to keep others alive. His older brother had flown reconnaissance missions earlier in the war. Arthur still remembered the cold November morning when a telegram arrived. Missing over the channel. No wreckage. No survivors. No farewell. Arthur never forgot his mother's silent cry that day. It stayed in his chest like a weight. And each time he heard the distant drone of aircraft engines, he felt an echo of that loss. That same distant hum followed him into the factory years later. It became his reminder, and his warning. He believed that if he worked hard enough, checked every bolt, cleaned every cylinder, maybe one less telegram would be sent. Maybe one mother would be spared the silence his family had endured. But the war did not reward hope. And soon he would learn that doing the right thing was far more dangerous than he ever imagined. He thought he understood the cost of war. He was wrong. By 1940, Arthur Hale had become one of the youngest senior fitters in the Merlin Engine Works. He was quiet, patient, and known for noticing things others missed. The factory floor was his world. The smell of metal dust, the heat from the polishing wheels, the steady rhythm of tools striking steel. Every shift began before dawn, when the windows were still dark and the first engines warmed under weak lamps. But it wasn't the machines that made the work heavy. It was the letters pinned on the notice board. Every few weeks, another pilot's name appeared. Lost in action. Failed to return. He recognized some of the serial numbers. Engines he had worked on. Engines he trusted. And each time, a small fear tightened inside him. The same whisper he had felt since his brother vanished over the channel. Then the failures grew stranger. Planes returning with sudden power loss. Engines seizing mid-flight. Mechanics in the field reported the same thing. Something deep inside the block was cracking under stress. It started small, almost invisible. But once it opened, the engine had only seconds before disaster. Arthur examined dozens of returned engines. He traced the fractures again and again. Same place. Same shape. Same deadly pattern. He knew this wasn't pilot error. It wasn't weather. It wasn't fate. It was a flaw. And flaws could be fixed, if someone was willing to listen. But when he tried to raise the alarm, he found himself standing in front of supervisors who judged production numbers, not human lives. Their answers were cold. The manuals were strict. The orders were final. Arthur walked back to his station that night with the distant hum of aircraft in his ears, heavier than ever. The war was pushing him toward a choice he did not want to make. And soon he would have no way to turn back. The more Arthur studied the engines, the more certain he became. The flaw was real. It lived in the same narrow corner of every failed block, like a quiet wound that deepened under heat and vibration. He documented everything: sketches, measurements, notes written in the margins of worn log sheets. He carried them in a small folder that never left his coat pocket. One cold morning he asked for an official meeting. He waited outside the supervisor's office, hands cold, boots coated with metal dust. He could hear typewriters clicking beyond the door, the sound of men who believed the war was won on paper. When he finally entered, he explained the fracture, the pattern, the risk. He showed the drawings. He described how a small reinforcement, a change in torque, and a slight shift in alignment could stop the crack before it began. But the response hit him harder than any explosion. Production must not slow. We follow the manual. Field issues are not our concern. Do not interfere with established design. To them his warning was noise. To him their refusal was a sentence. He walked back to the factory floor with the folder pressed against his chest. He felt the engines vibrating through the concrete as test stands roared in the distance. The distant hum, the same echo from his childhood, now seemed like a reminder of every pilot who trusted these machines with his life. At his bench, he opened a new engine block and stared at the exact point where the fracture would form. A tiny place. A simple part. But the consequences were enormous. If he fixed it secretly, he could save lives. If he stayed silent, he would be part of the loss. The war was no longer outside the factory. It was inside him now. And the next step he took would change everything. Days turned into weeks and the failures continued. Arthur watched new engine blocks roll in, shining and flawless on the outside, hiding the same quiet danger within. Every unit built meant another aircraft in the sky, and another pilot trusting a machine he knew could betray him. He worked longer hours. Sometimes he stayed after his shift, pretending to tidy his bench while he checked engines in the shadows. He traced the weak spot with his finger each time, feeling the cold metal under his skin. The flaw was always there waiting. The factory around him grew louder. Production targets increased. Supervisors pushed harder. Workers moved like ghosts through the noise, tired and hollow from endless shifts. But Arthur carried something heavier, the certainty that silence would cost lives. Then one evening a test pilot visited the plant. A young man with calm eyes and a quiet smile. He shook Arthur's hand and thanked him for the engines. "They keep us alive up there," he said. The words cut through Arthur like a blade. That night, Arthur lay awake in his small rented room, listening to the engines of training planes humming over the town. The same echo from his childhood. The same warning. He imagined that pilot, thousands of feet up, trusting a machine with a hidden crack growing beneath him. Arthur's chest tightened. Someone had to act. Someone had to fix what the officials refused to see. But the path ahead was dangerous. Tampering with military equipment was treason. If caught, he would face prison. If misunderstood, he would be called a saboteur. Yet the alternative was worse. He looked at his hands in the dark and knew they would soon cross a line. The real test was coming. The decision began quietly. No grand moment. No dramatic spark. Just a tired man standing alone at his bench long after the others had gone home. The lamps overhead flickered as the wind pressed against the factory windows. Arthur pulled one engine block toward him and stared at the weak point he knew too well. He opened his folder. His sketches showed a simple fix, a small change in torque and alignment. Easy to perform, impossible to authorize. It required bending the manual, braking procedure, and risking everything. He picked up his wrench. Cold metal. A trembling hand. The distant hum of aircraft drifted through the night, the same soft reminder that had followed him since his childhood. It felt now like the voices of the men who would fly tomorrow, asking him to choose. He tried to walk away. He set the wrench down. He paced the workshop floor, boots echoing in the empty room. He whispered to himself that this was madness, that the war punished mistakes, that a good man followed orders. But he also knew that engines were honest. And this engine was telling him it would fail. So he locked the workshop door. He checked the windows. He moved with the quiet focus of a surgeon preparing for an operation. Then, in one hidden motion, he made the forbidden adjustment. A small twist. A shift no inspector would notice. A correction the manual warned never to touch. The engine gave a soft metallic click. A sound that felt like a promise, or a warning. He stepped back, breathing hard. The line had been crossed. The war had pulled him into a place where rules no longer protected lives. But he also felt something else, a faint, dangerous sense of purpose. This was only the first engine. And soon there would be many more. Within days, Arthur had modified more engines than he dared to count. Each adjustment was small, almost invisible, yet powerful enough to stop the deadly fracture before it began. He worked in silence, choosing moments when supervisors walked elsewhere, when the floor grew thin with workers, when no one suspected the quiet man at bench 32. But secrets have weight. And Arthur felt that weight growing heavier each day. Rumors spread of increased inspections. Supervisors whispered about unusual patterns. Security tightened around the test stands. One morning, as Arthur tightened a bolt on a new block, a senior inspector stopped behind him. The man's boots clicked sharply on the concrete. His shadow fell across Arthur's hands. "Production must be exact," the inspector said. "Any deviation will be investigated." Arthur nodded, heartbeat thudding in his ears. He could feel sweat gathering under his collar despite the cold air. The inspector studied him for a long moment before walking away. Arthur exhaled slowly. Too close. Far too close. That night he debated stopping. He sat on the edge of his bed, listening to the distant hum of aircraft, the same echo that chased him everywhere. The same reminder of why he began this path. He imagined the young test pilot again. He imagined others like him, alone in the sky, depending on engines built in this very room. Engines that needed the fix. Engines that his hands could save. Fear battled duty inside him. Duty won. Arthur returned to the factory with sharper focus. He moved faster, hid his modifications deeper, trusted no one. Every sound startled him. Every footstep near his bench tightened his chest. The fear of being caught grew stronger than ever. But so did the knowledge that lives were at stake. And soon the greatest pressure he had ever faced would arrive at his door. The breaking point came on a gray morning when the factory siren sounded earlier than usual. Workers gathered near the test hangar, whispers cutting through the cold air. A Merlin engine had failed during a training flight the night before. The plane barely landed. The pilot survived, shaken and pale, claiming the engine, felt ready to tear itself apart. Arthur felt his stomach drop. Had he missed something? Had one of his secret fixes gone wrong? He pushed through the crowd, heart pounding. Supervisors stood in a circle around the damaged engine, their faces stiff. The block was cracked. The same deadly fracture, but in a way Arthur had never seen before. Something didn't fit the pattern. Then he saw the inspection tags. They weren't his. This engine had left the factory untouched by his hand. A quiet dread washed over him. But before relief could settle, the head of inspection spoke. "A mechanic has been secretly altering engines. Evidence suggests sabotage. We will find him." Arthur froze. His breath caught. They had discovered the modifications, but not his purpose. They thought it was treason. Then came the real twist, the one that changed everything. An RAF engineer arrived from the airfield. He carried data from recent missions. Engines that had received Arthur's forbidden fix were performing better. Stronger climbs, fewer failures, cooler temperatures. Pilots had started calling them the lucky engines. The officer looked at the supervisors and said, "Whoever made these adjustments saved men's lives." A heavy silence filled the hangar. Arthur stood among the crowd, the weight of secrecy pressing against his chest. They were hunting him as a saboteur, while praising the unknown mechanic as a savior. He felt the distant hum of aircraft again, soft and steady, the echo that followed him everywhere. Was he a hero, a criminal, or something in between? And how long could the truth stay hidden? Arthur walked back to his bench that evening with the world spinning around him. The hangar scene replayed in his mind again and again, the cracked engine, the accusations, the praise, the fear. He felt caught between two shadows, one calling him a saboteur, the other calling him a savior. And neither side knew the truth. The supervisors doubled inspections after the incident. Security men walked the aisles with stern faces and sharp eyes. Every worker felt the tension, but only Arthur knew its true reason. Each time an inspector passed behind him, he felt the same chill he had felt since childhood, the distant hum of aircraft echoing in his chest. He tried to keep his hands steady, but guilt tugged at him. Not guilt for what he had done, he believed in the fix, but guilt for the lies he had allowed to grow. For the silence he carried like a hidden wound. At night, he returned to his small room exhausted. He sat at the edge of the bed, boots still on, and stared at his hands. These hands had saved lives, and yet could also put him in chains if the wrong person connected the dots. Then a knock came at his door. A quiet, careful knock. When he opened it, he found the same RAF test pilot he had met weeks earlier. The young man looked tired from long flying hours but grateful, almost emotional. He thanked Arthur again. Not for one engine, but for many. Pilots were noticing the difference. Rumors in the airfield spoke of engines touched by luck, engines that felt smoother, steadier, somehow safer. The young pilot said he didn't know who was responsible, but whoever it was, he saved more men than he'll ever meet. Arthur listened in silence, throat tight. He could not confess. He could not deny. He only nodded. After the pilot left, Arthur closed the door and leaned against it, eyes closed. The distant hum of aircraft drifted through the night once more, soft and steady. He wondered how long this balance could last. How long before gratitude turned back into suspicion. And how long before someone finally discovered the truth. The next weeks unfolded with a quiet intensity that pressed hard on Arthur's nerves. Every morning he walked through the steel gates of the factory with the same fear sitting in his chest. He wondered if this would be the day someone pointed at him, the day a supervisor called his name, the day the quiet hum of engines outside was drowned by the heavy sound of boots marching toward him. But instead of calm or danger, he found something stranger. Both. Engines with his forbidden adjustment were performing exceptionally well. Reports from the front described longer flight times, fewer mid-air failures, smoother climbs. RAF officers began visiting the plant more often, walking among the benches with notebooks and questions. Supervisors puffed their chests, proud of their work, still unaware of the quiet hands that made the real difference. Arthur kept his head down, but every success brought its own kind of fear. The more lives his secret saved, the higher the risk of discovery. He felt as if he were walking a tightrope stretched over a deep void. One misstep and everything would collapse. Then one afternoon the head inspector arrived with 2 military police officers. Their boots echoed sharply across the factory floor. Workers watched in silence. Arthur felt a cold wave crawl up his spine. Someone, the inspector said, has altered engines without authorization. This is a matter of national security. Arthur stared at the floor. His pulse quickened. The distant hum of aircraft rang in his ears again, like a warning from the past. The inspector continued. If the saboteur believes he is helping, he must come forward. Secret actions, even well-meant, can cost lives. Arthur knew what the inspector didn't. Without those secret actions, dozens, maybe hundreds, of pilots would already be dead. He clenched his fists behind his back, fighting the urge to speak. Confession meant prison. Silence meant another day of saving pilots. The choice that had once felt clear now felt impossibly heavy. By the time the officers left, Arthur's shirt was damp with sweat. The echo of their boots stayed with him long after they were gone. And he knew that the danger was tightening around him. Soon he would have to choose between truth and survival. Arthur's world narrowed to a single line of fear and purpose. Every step he took inside the factory felt heavier than the one before it. He worked with the precision of a surgeon, but the heart of a hunted man. The military police returned more often. Inspectors lingered longer behind his bench. Each time he bent over an engine, he felt eyes watching, waiting, judging. But the war outside did not slow. Reports from the front grew darker. Pilots were pushed harder. Missions stretched longer. And the Merlin engines with Arthur's secret fix continued to outperform expectations. They brought crews home through brutal weather, through heavy fire, through nights when the sky itself seemed ready to swallow them. Arthur heard stories whispered in the break room. A bomber limping home on one engine, one of the lucky ones. A fighter pilot landing safely after a long chase, engine still strong. A crew writing a letter to thank the nameless mechanic who cared enough. He sat alone during these moments, feeling pride rise inside him like a warm tide, and then guilt crushing it flat again. Pride for saving men he would never meet. Guilt because every life saved meant another thread tying him to the truth, pulling it dangerously close to the surface. One evening, as he finished a shift, the head inspector approached him directly. The man's eyes were sharp, his voice low. "We know someone has been changing the engines," he said. "We are close to finding him. Very close." Arthur's breath caught. For a moment he couldn't speak. The inspector leaned closer. "Whoever it is, he should pray he understands the consequences." As the man walked away, Arthur stood frozen in the empty aisle. The factory around him went quiet. Even the familiar hum of distant aircraft felt faint, like a memory fading into the dark. He knew the moment was coming. The moment no secret could escape. And when it arrived, he would have to face everything he had done. The lives he saved, the rules he broke, and the line he crossed with his trembling hands. In the end, there was no hiding from the truth. The truth never exploded into the open. It didn't end with soldiers storming the workshop, or with Arthur standing before a tribunal. Instead, it unfolded quietly, the way most forgotten acts of courage do. Weeks after the heightened inspections, a new directive arrived from the RAF Engineering Command. It recommended a small adjustment in torque and alignment for Merlin engines, almost identical to the one Arthur had created in secret. The document carried the RAF seal. It was official. It was approved. And it spread to every factory across Britain. But no one asked where the idea came from. No name was included. No credit given. Arthur watched the supervisors praise this new improvement. They implemented it proudly as if they had discovered it themselves. Workers nodded, relieved that the mysterious sabotage investigation had ended. The police stopped their patrols. The inspectors relaxed. The factory returned to its rhythm. For Arthur, it was a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. He would never be recognized. He would never be thanked openly. He would never see his name on a medal or a report. But he watched the pilots visiting the plant again, smiling, alive, telling stories of engines that carried them safely home. Some mentioned how the new adjustment changed everything. Others simply said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Arthur stayed quiet. He carried the secret alone. Years later, long after the war ended, he lived a simple life in a small house overlooking quiet fields. Sometimes, on cold mornings, he placed his hand on old metal tools and felt the same tremble he felt in 1942. The same echo of distant aircraft humming in the sky. He never told anyone. Not his wife. Not his children. Not the men whose lives he saved. But in rare moments, when he sat alone with a cup of tea and the wind carried a faint, familiar hum, he allowed himself one small thought. I did what I had to do. History never wrote his name. But hundreds of families kept their sons and fathers because of him. And somewhere in the endless pages of the war, his courage rests quietly, like a hidden bolt tightened by a steady hand. At the end, ask yourself, what would you have done?